muito grande
has a
para todos
huge
nós, para
importance
toda a
for all of
comunidade dos
us,
trabalhadores
for
e
all the
trabalhadoras
community
do mundo inteiro,
of
porque nós
workers throughout
estamos,
the
nesse
world,
momento,
because right now
nos
we
propondo a
are
debater a questão
proposing
da
to debate
estrangeirização
the
das
issue
terras
of
em nossos
foreign
continentes. É
purchase
claro
of
que nós vamos
lands in our
ter as
continents. Of course,
apresentações
we're
de
going to
cada
have
uma das
presentations
pessoas, nós vamos
from
estar
different people who
falando
are here
aqui
today.
também
We're
do
going to be
Brasil.
talking about
Eu
Brazil
gostaria de,
as
nesse
well.
momento, então,
And
desejar
at this moment, I'd like
boas-vindas
to
a todos e
wish you all
todas,
a big
dizer que é
welcome
uma reunião
and to
bastante
say that this is
importante, é um
a very important
webinário
meeting.
onde a gente propõe
It is a webinar in which we
debater a
propose to debate
estrangeirização das terras, mas depois,
the
não só hoje, depois
foreignization
a
or
gente
foreign purchase of
continua
lands, but not
aí
just today.
também com
Later,
um
we'll be
período
continuing
de
this in a
aproximadamente um
period of
mês para
approximately
poder
1 month
fazer os
so
debates
that we have
mais localizados, mais
more
nos
localized
continentes ou em
debates
cada
in each
país.
continent or in
Então,
each country.
a gente traz aqui
So we have
essa
here
abertura desse debate.
an opening of this debate.
Desejo a todos
I'd
excelente
like to wish you all
conferência,
a
né,
great
e que nós
conference
possamos
and
aqui
that we
trabalhar
might be able to work
com bastante eficiência para a gente
with a
aproveitar o
lot of
nosso tempo que
efficiency
vai
so that
até
we can take
às 12
advantage of our
horas.
time,
Eu
which
gostaria
is
de
until
saber
12
se
here in Brazil
Mazé
time.
está
I'd like to
presente.
say
Mazé
whether
faria uma
Mazé is here because
saudação de
Mazé would
3 minutos,
do a
mas eu
quick 3-minute
não
greeting,
vi
but
Mazé por aqui ainda.
I haven't
Você
seen Mazé
consegue
here.
ver? O
Is
Mazé, você
Mazé
está?
here?
A Mazé é a secretária de Mulheres da CONTAG, da nossa Confederação
Mazé
Nacional dos
is the Women's
Trabalhadores na
Secretariat
Agricultura
of our
Familiar aqui do
community,
Brasil.
which is the Family Agricultural
Ela
Workers
faria
Association of Brazil. She would
uma saudação a todos e
make a
todos.
quick greeting here today, but
Mazé,
Mazé, are you here?
tá, eu acho que Mazé não se encontra,
Okay,
né?
I think Mazé is not present here in the
Então,
call. So
esse evento vai ter sido
this event will be moderated by myself, Alaí. I am the Agrarian Politics Director of CONTAG, which is our confederation, and Christian, who comes from IGTER. So welcome, Christian. Let us continue our important event.
Gracias, Alair, y muchas gracias a todos los.
Thank you, Alaí. Thank everyone, all the participants of this conference, and all the different panelists who are here today. My name is Christian Moreno. And I like to coordinate the participation of this forum. I'd like to record, just like Ali mentioned at this moment, that this is a moment of discussion which will be extended over more than 1 month, and it's a space in which we will have other conferences. We'll have a Brazilian conference on February 23rd, and we'll also have a European conference with, we don't have the exact date yet. We also have the closing conference on March 7th, and I'd like to give some indications as far as the technical side of it to the participants who just arrived. We have simultaneous interpretation in 4 different languages: English, Portuguese, Spanish, and French. So you are able to select this on the lower side of the screen on Zoom, the language of your choosing. And I'd like to say that the second part of this conference will be open for debate with questions and comments by all of the participants. The space is open so that you can make your questions and comments to each other. And further on, we will use this debate space so that we can ask questions to the panelists or make open questions to all the panelists. I'd also like to remind you all that everyone can keep on participating in the online debate space. This is a debate that can be developed on our forum for the struggle for land. I'm sure you all received the link on your email and your social media And so for this, it's necessary to enroll online. Right now, we have around 500 people enrolled to share comments, documents, questions, and the translation is done as simultaneous interpretation. So you can choose the language of your preference. And so we'd like to invite to bring energy to this space, which is so important to all the organizations that are part of this committee, the pilot committee of the forum. So now we'd like to start with the panelist presentations. We will have 4 speakers with 4 different themes. And we'll start with Philippe Sofer, who will be presenting on the financialization of land. He comes from Germany, and he is a human rights defender. He works in the International Secretariat of FIAN, which is a global organization. He works with the right to nutrition and adequate food. Philippe has worked with small producers, organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, civil society organizations, and has concentrated on the issue of land tenure, fishing, natural resource management, seed management, and biodiversity. And he has been working with the issue of financialization of lands and territories. So now we'd like to open the floor to Philip. And so each panelist's presentation will be 15 minutes. We'll have 4 15-minute long presentations, and after that, we'll open up to debates, okay? So now I'd like to open the floor to Philip.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I will speak in English. I hope the interpretation works fine. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and to invite me to share some thoughts. I will just put up my presentation, hoping that it will work. I hope you can see my screen now. So what as Christian said, I will speak a bit about the financialization of territories and nature. This is a bit of an abstract concept, perhaps, but I will try to make it understandable. And I think it contributes to the discussion on, foreign ownership of land, as we see it in different parts of the world. Before I start, I would like to make 2 preliminary remarks. The first one being that what I will present today is the fruit of collective work. So as Christian said, I work with FIAN International, but this work that we have been doing with many other organizations, including small-scale food producers organizations, from around the world. So it's not our specific work, but it's based on collective work. And the second thing I would just like to say that in the second part of my presentation, I will mention some examples, and I will refer specifically to Europe. But that is not to say that it's only an issue that affects Europe, but it's more to have different regions in our conversation today. So when we speak about land issues, obviously, I think we are all aware that there is a great wave of what is often called land grabs, and those result in the loss of land over territories. So this is lands, this is forests, this is fisheries, water resources that happen around the world, and which also destroy the very social fabric of the community. So the very basis of the community, and what it entails is an increasing control over those territories by a few powerful actors, mainly corporations, but also individuals. But we will look a bit into who are those actors. What we have seen in our work and in the discussions with social movements, with grassroots organizations, is that the dynamics, land conflicts are not something new, but the dynamics have changed over the past years. And what we see is that there are changes, and what we think is that one of the main drivers is let's say, a change also in how capitalism works, and that it has moved towards what can call finance capitalism. So it's capitalism that is weighing a lot in of financial actors and financial interactions and financial markets. So when we speak about financial capitalism or finance capitalism, what we speak about is the increasing dominance of global finance over the productive economy, right? So we have the creation of wealth predominantly happens in the sphere of financial markets. And those financial markets, they are tied to the real world, obviously, but they are in a way also virtual and kind of disconnected of the needs of people, and also the amounts of money that flow around on those financial markets is actually completely disconnected to the actual value that is created in the productive economy. The underlying logic of financial transaction is to have quick returns on investment, and it's speculating with money, basically, trying to make money with more money, and we have all seen the consequences over the past years and decades, and we're still seeing it. And I think it's important for our discussion, obviously, to be also very clear that this is not just happening out of nothing, but it's the result of policies that have been taken, and particularly policies in Europe and the USA that have deregulated financial actors and that are very much embedded in an overall neoliberal approach. What you will see now on the screen is just to illustrate what I just said. So you see how the global financial assets, so that is the money, the financial assets, have increased over the years. And this chart on the right-hand side, the big circle, that's 2010. So that has obviously still increased much more. But what you can see is that the share of financial assets as compared to the global, the GDP, the gross domestic product, and you see that whereas both grow, so the inner circle is the gross domestic product, you can see that the financial markets have grown exponentially more. And this is what usually is called the financialization of the economy. And when you try to understand what that means for our topic, land and people's territories, I think it's we can apply the same logic also to our sector, which is when you speak about finance capitalism and when the economy financializes, what you see, financial actors, they see new asset classes. So land, water, oceans, instead of being public goods or being resources, they become financial assets. And those assets, they are then transformed into financial instruments, futures, derivatives, which are then traded on markets, on financial markets, and one indicator and one phenomenon that I think we can see in almost all parts of the world is that we see new actors in the land sector. So you have like banks and asset management companies, investment funds, but also insurance companies, and so on. So when we speak about who are these new actors and where are they based, I think it's quite straightforward to put out some kind of a geography of a financial capitalism, where we will see that the big, and unsurprisingly, is that the big financial corporations, most of them are based in the US, the United States, and some of them also in Europe, and they're specifically in the United Kingdoms. And you see that those financial corporations, those asset management companies, they are like they may interact themselves as buying up land and so on, but often they are also hidden because they are stakeholders in or shareholders in big agribusiness companies, for example, such as Bayer or others. I will not go into detail about these maps, but it's just to say that obviously there is, a structure of a kind of neo-colonial structure of this financial world, where you see also small countries that act principally as tax havens, but which become important also for the control over lands. And I think just in a term, it's just a fact to state that some of the lands that have been bought up in all parts of the world by those financial actors, they are kind of formally controlled of some of these tax havens. So what you get, and this is maybe something that some of you have seen, this is just one example, but what this means also for when you look into like a specific land conflict or a land acquisition, that you see often there is behind the actor that we see and that communities see on the ground, there is like a whole web of investors where you have like sub companies and you have investors and you have shareholders, and often it's really not easy to understand who is actually operating here. So this is just one example from the from Africa, but I think it's something that we're seeing around the world. So just to make it a bit less abstract, I would just mention two examples, and as I said, it will be two examples from Europe. The first one is Germany, and the photo that you see on the screen, these are young farmers, members of German peasant organizations who have occupied lands in Eastern Germany, and they have campaigned for many years for expropriating and redistributing lands that have been acquired by companies in that country. And in this specific case, it's an interesting case for us because it's it has been this company which is called KTG Agrar, and which doesn't exist anymore today, but it has became one of the largest landowners in Germany, with transactions that were mostly illegitimate and sometimes straightforward illegal. And at some point, this company went bankrupt, and that's when the authorities realized that actually there was a whole web of sub-companies through which this company owned a great amount of land in Eastern Germany. And still, even though this was illegal, they managed to sell most of its land to other financial investors, including one insurance company. Munich Re is one of the world's biggest insurance company. And the way they circumvented existing laws is that they did not sell the lands, but they sold the sub-companies, the subsidiaries. So in that sense, the regulations that applied for land deals did not apply, and actually the authorities could not impede this. So instead of kind of using the bankruptcy of this company to redistribute the land, actually it became it remained in the hands of financial actors. The other example that I want to mention is Romania, where a peasant organization that some of you might know, it's called Ecoruralis. They have done great work in documenting land grabs in the country, which is in Eastern Europe and has seen a lot of land grabs. There are some estimates that up to 4 million hectares of land might have been grabbed, and there is also a clear connection that has been made with the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy, which is the biggest common policy of the European Union, and which kind of through different mechanisms it fosters land concentration and drives land grabs. And what we see in Romania is that one, let's say, type of financial actor that is very visible there is our pension funds. And I think pension funds is a very important actor to look at when we look into dynamics around land. They manage huge amount of money. When you say globally, they manage more than 50 trillion US dollars, so that's a lot of money. And when they move into land, obviously this has major implications. And I think this particular company, that the logo that you see, Nuveen, which owns more than 70,000 hectares of land in Romania, it's always operating in other countries, including in Brazil, where it has lands in different parts, especially in the Cerrado, through different investment funds, but pension funds are one of those actors that we see that have massively invested in land. So I said in the beginning, we said rogue capitalism, we said finance capitalism, but then as we discussed with organizations, with our partner organizations, we thought finance, when we speak about financialization, even finance capitalism, in a way, it doesn't actually get across the hideous, the violent nature of what is happening. So as a let's say, another term that we propose is rogue capitalism. And what do we mean by rogue capitalism? We refer, as I said, it's like a hidden system of wealth accumulation, so that many of those actors that have actually are extracting the wealth are not necessarily the actors that we see that on the ground and that communities, let's say, see as grabbing their lands. And often they act outside of, or they seek to act outside of political and judicial control. This is the point that I mentioned earlier on these financial centers, which are mainly tax havens. They have special jurisdictions that are very difficult to hold these actors to account. What we see, and this is not something new, but I think it's important to say, is that it's a very violent system of ecological and social destruction that we are seeing. And I think the fact that, you know, some of the key actors are not visible maybe can even contribute to make this increasingly violent. And what it entails is a loss of people's sovereignty, of community sovereignty over their territories. Wherever they are. As time, I don't want to take too much time. I just want to mention two things, and then if you are interested, you can contact me, or we can have it also in the round of in the interaction part. I just wanted to mention two more aspects that seem important to us as we look at also the future, potential future challenges. Is that in our analysis, it's important also when we look at this whole complex of what is happening around land and financialization, raw capitalism, that we also consider or understand how those processes are linked to processes of digitalization. So, you know, the use of digital technologies and how they are used by these actors. I think this is an important part. And then also to understand the links of how these dynamics are linked to what is often called the green or the blue economy or the bioeconomy. Anyway, you know, these responses to the environmental crises that are based on financial mechanisms, basically. So when you look at climate change policies that are around carbon offsets and these kinds of things, I think this is very linked to these financial markets as well. As I said, I don't have the time now to go in depth into it, but this is something that we are also trying to understand better, and I think it's important to keep in mind. And as a very final, perhaps to close my presentation, I just want to point also to what I just said. In a way, we have also thought about what arises from this analysis for the social struggles that are happening on the ground. And I understand this is also a process of discussion that we are launching today. And so these might also be some inputs for those discussions. So what are the challenges, that the new challenges in a way, or old and new challenges that arise? And the first thing is that I said what I've mentioned before is that we have these investment webs and we have many hidden actors. And I think this is obviously for many communities who are already struggling to hold actors into account. It's another difficulty because you have all these hidden investors that are hiding away in tax havens. How are we supposed to hold those to account for violations that happen on the ground? And what do we also do that when investors change and these kinds of things? So that opens up a very challenging situations for many social organizations. I think it's an extension. In a way, it's a new form of corporate control over people's territories. So there's really a question when we speak about regulations. We need to understand that it's that corporate the regulation of corporate actors also needs to include financial actors, and that it's absolutely urgent that we need effective regulations. But for us, or many of us who might be more used to looking into land regulations, I think it's important to also start to look into policies and policy fields that are not like maybe directly related to land. So maybe we have to look into things like, regulation of financial actors, and if we then climate policies and these kinds of things, which I think many organizations are already starting to do, but I think we need in the current context, it's more important than ever. And I think this relates to my last point, which is also that there is really a renewed need for convergence of struggles, so that those of us who struggle for the right to land and for territories, that we also seek to work with other movements and alliances that work on issues like financial justice, like climate justice, because as we see, the crises are converging, and I think more than ever, there is also a need for convergence of struggles. And I think we all agree on that, and we know that in practice it's sometimes more difficult, but I think it's important to keep in mind. And I would leave it here for now, and looking forward to the other presentations and the discussions. Just a final word to say that what I have presented, there is also a report out which is available in English, Spanish, and French, and will soon be available also in Portuguese. And so if you're interested, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to share it with you. And thank you very much again. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Felipe.
Thank you so much, Philip. It was a beautiful presentation that contributes a lot to our purpose in debating foreignization of lands throughout the world. Now, we will bring a little bit of the Latin American context. And the person that's going to present this panel is Ana Jacqueline Gomes Terra. She is an agronomist engineer, a professor at the University of Uruguay, and the ex-president of the Colonization Institute of Uruguay. She is going to bring a presentation about the types of occupation of land by foreign companies in Uruguay and in the South Cone countries in Latin America, and their aspects in relation to local population. So welcome, Ana Jacqueline. Oh, you have your time. The floor is open. Well, thank you. Just 1 second to remind all the participants that you can share your questions and chats in the chat and the question and answers if you have any comments or questions. Okay, you can continue. I'm going to share my screen so that we can see my presentation. Can you see it? Yes. So this is our idea. Our idea is to have an overview about the landscape in Latin America and to evaluate and work on the themes in relation to land grabbing in general and foreignization. And land grabbing includes foreignization. And in Latin America, we also have regional and national investors that work in this process of concentration of land, which affects the sovereignty of our territories as well. We're also going to be talking about foreign investors. They exist and are here so that we can have this general overview. We're going to share some information from some countries. Unfortunately, we can't speak about all of them. And then we're going to have some final thoughts. So, as Philip has mentioned, we've talked about concentration and foreign ownership of land, which is a historical process. This leads to concentration of wealth and also impacts in a determinate way the continuity and the deepening of poverty in countries throughout the world and Latin America specifically. So this concentration happens through the intensification of production, by the increase in farm surface area, advanced technology use, and we had different moments throughout history. In the 2000s, we've had the search for new investors, the more profitable assets, also primary goods were raised in value, and in the logic of capital concentration, all this happened. So starting from the 2000s, different companies connected to agribusiness were participating. They were connected to European funds and state-owned companies as well, like Chinese state-owned companies, for instance, that were connected to production of foodstuffs. So ever since then, investors have changed, the type of investors, where they come from, including a lot of companies, like Philip mentioned, they have a different logic of financialization and the logic of intervention in this concentration logic. And other countries started participating, countries from Southeast Asia, for instance, and we've had and also land ownership has a lot to do with financial processes. So this is really connected to the land tenure structure, to the regulation framework, and without a doubt, development policies which the government applies. We have Latin American investors, foreign and national investors. We have from the private sector, public sector, we have governments, we have companies, we have investment funds. And they can be focused on the production of agriculture and financial investments. So the idea is that we have a variety of different mechanisms for foreignization. And the theme is not just land tenure. We have this process of land grabbing is very varied. We have direct purchases, we have foreign investment in state-owned lands, transfer of communal lands, which impact the rights of different peoples. We also have the change in land tenure from communal lands. We have land grabbing through violence and corruption and through subsidized companies, which is what Philip was just mentioning, that there are a lot of investors and oftentimes you can't see who the investors are. So to be able to see and really find out who are the foreign and national investors, oftentimes we have alliances between national and foreign companies with subsidiary companies. So this allows them to hide this way of land concentration and to financialize and capitalize it. So I think it's very important to see that we have a variety of different ways to do this, and some of them are not on our databases because they are carried out through corruption mechanisms. They are outside the law, and this happens in different countries. In Latin America, it's one of the regions with the most land grabbing in the world. So from 2000 to 2017, the main regions was first of all Africa, then Asia, then Latin America. And in Latin America, a big characteristic that's very important is that the land transactions that are carried out, the way that they acquire land is through land ownership, is not through necessarily through land grabbing. Oftentimes it happens through business between different private entities, acquire land from private owners.
Estatales y comunales que sin ninguna duda tienen un impacto
State
impresionante
and communal lands.
en los pueblos originarios y en las comunidades.
And so this affects the indigenous people and the different communities in our countries. And here we have the main actors that are participating in Latin America, the main investors. So we can see here that between 2000 and 2019 in Latin America, 45% of these land purchases came from foreign investors. So this the foreignization of lands that can be seen in this graph, but national actors also had a very large participation at 44%. And we come back to the previous discussion of how many of these are actually national and how many of them are actually connected to foreign investors. We also have regional investors, which here are 11%. The United States, for instance, are the major investing country in the region among all these actors, together with China and the Netherlands. The United States intervene in 11 countries. The American funds are in 11 different countries. So here we can see the 10 main investors. So we have China, United States, Netherlands, India, Argentina, and a variety of other countries that participate in this process. And when we look at the countries that have the most investment inside Latin America and have the most land grabbed, the ones that suffered this land grabbing, we have Brazil, Argentina, and Guyana as the three largest ones, where we have this concentration between 2000 and 2017. After that, we have Colombia, Paraguay, and actually productive lands have been affected by this process of concentration and foreignization of land. And in general, these countries that are here in the beginning of the list on the left, they have a process of concentration and foreignization of land, which is historic. And it's also connected to the way that the agrarian culture in those countries have their origins. We have 17 different foreign countries investing in Argentina, Brazil, and 11 in Uruguay. These are the sources for land grabbing in countries, and they are very wide-reaching. This image here, and what I want to show with it, is the areas that have the most investment, the origin and the destination. We have the origin in the first image in the region, and they also affect the land grabbing process. So Brazil and Argentina, they're countries who also have this role. They are a part of this percentage of countries in the region that purchase land inside the same region of Latin America. And the image on the right, we have countries that have wide important national investment. So we have 10 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean who are regional investors. We have Argentina, that's an important country. Argentina, Brazil is also very important in this area. And then we have 15 countries in the area who also have national investors who also promote this process of land concentration. together with the foreignization process. So concentration goes hand in hand with foreignization because the impact on the sovereignty of the territory and food sovereignty and the rights of the different peoples, they're all together. The impact ends up being one, the same in a certain way. But going beyond this and impacting the different communities and peoples in these countries. So these lands are usually destined to different kinds of national and regional and foreign investors. And here we have the three columns: agriculture, forestation, and others. So the main interest in agriculture for foreign leaders, that's the main one, 54%, for regionals, 61%, and for nationals, 67%. So they have a common intervention logic among them and of land grabbing because and they're connected to this process of large-scale food production, biofuel production. A lot of cases in which we have policies, development policies that are developed in land grabbing, including mining and other activities. So let's get some information from some of the countries. We have Argentina, for instance. They have 5.23% of the country's land under the hands of foreigners. And here we have the different provinces, and none of the provinces. Oh, we have the rural land law from 2011 establishes a 15% limit on all ownership of rural land by foreigners. But ever since the Macri government, they've basically unmade this policy. And so through a decree, but in 2022, none of the provinces went above 15%. We have 14.7 million hectares. So all of Uruguay, for instance, the same size as Uruguay, are in foreign lands in Argentina, and not all of it is completely identified. We don't have the full information. But the rural land established a fundamental activity because now we have information from the website of the ministry. And now we have Brazil. We already have a country, one of our colleagues is going to be talking about that. So we have around 33% of the surface in the southeast of Brazil is in the ownership of foreign companies or foreigners in general. We have other regions with other concentrations. So the data that we have from INCRA, the National Institute of Agrarian Reform, doesn't include land that's acquired by frauds or other illegal activities. So we have some examples. Philip was mentioning some of them. We have some land that is in the hands of certain companies, which are actually subsidiaries of larger companies. We have pension funds, for instance. And if we already include 2 pension funds, we have around 20% more land that's in foreign hands because it doesn't enter the logic of the registration of land in Brazil. Well, we have Paraguay, has the highest land concentration in the world with a Gini index that's very high. So the information we have is 35% of Paraguayan land controlled by foreigners, but there are actually a lot of connections between national companies and foreign companies that would raise this number even higher. And this brings a very land concentration area and is very much connected to the advance of the agricultural frontier. And so it definitely affects their sovereignty. And so this has to do with the War of the Triple Alliance, also known as the Paraguayan War. And so in Uruguay, we have 56% of the farms accumulating 5% of the surface area. That is, all the family agriculture is included here, and 9% of the farms accumulate over 60% of the surface area. As for foreignization, between 2011 and 2000, it's been the number of farms that went up, went down, but the 2.9% of the area is now in the hands. But that we have the land in the hands of legal entities. So in 2000, we had 0.9% of the farms and 1% of the area. Only 1% of the area went to 43%, and 14% of farms went to the hands of legal entities. So this presents a change in the agrarian structure of my country. And so under the assumption that the majority of the corporations are foreign, and from 2000 to 2011, Uruguayans went from controlling 90% to 53.9% of the surface. And we also had this process of ongoing land concentration. So legal entities are a part of what has contributed to this situation. Some final thoughts in general terms. Well, without a doubt, land grabbing and large land transactions generated by foreign ownership and land concentration have led to changes in land use, land governance, and access to land resources. And so this leads, this transformation of land dedicated to subsistence agriculture into large-scale commercial agriculture. We have more foreign investment. We have the types of land access has changed, and type of land tenure has changed. The role of states is determinant in this process, is very important in this process of land grabbing. And also the regulatory frameworks for access to public-owned land and to control the advance of foreign ownership and land concentration is very important. These partnerships between national and foreign companies are very important. And to wrap up, the impact in rural space happens through this process of the land grabbing and large transactions. We have important environmental crises and biodiversity loss. And we have land grabbing by these large companies, and have a loss of capacity by the different peoples of these countries for their sovereignty and their capacity to intervene in this process and to create their lifestyles. And the deterritorialization and the land grabbing affecting peasants and indigenous people. They have depopulation of rural area, and we have a variety of different varieties, and lots of mechanisms are used in this process. And finally, defending and maintaining the fight for family agriculture, peasant agriculture, indigenous agriculture is a necessary condition. We need to fight for this because the norms and the regulatory frameworks protect these territories, these peasant, and they're very necessary, this sort of regulatory framework. Food sovereignty and territorial sovereignty have, without a doubt, a huge importance for social organizations, which are fundamental in the defense of these rights. And it's always very relevant to have this role of defense of territories. And as Philippe mentioned, we need to build these alliances, converging efforts at the level of different organizations and countries who have similar interests in the defense of family agriculture, peasant agriculture, indigenous agriculture. Here I have a little bit of bibliography. Thank you so much for your time. And now we have open for discussion. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your interesting intervention with a lot of context for the Latin American continent. And so we'd like to open the floor at this time to Junior Fidelis, specifically in relation to land concentration in the Brazilian context.
Universidad Federal de Goiás. Él ha sido procurador federal desde 2007 y procurador en jefe del Instituto Nacional de Colonización y Reforma Agraria. Damos entonces la palabra a Junior sobre el contexto brasileño.
Olá, bom dia, me ouve bem?
Good morning,
Vou tentar
everyone.
fazer minha
Can you hear
apresentação
me?
aqui.
I will try to pull up my presentation.
Conseguem vê-la?
Can you see it?
Sim, Júnior.
Ok, muito obrigado. Então, eu gostaria primeiro de parabenizar a
First, I'd
organização
like to
do Fórum de Lutas pela Terra e
congratulate you
pelos
all for
recursos
organizing
naturais,
this event.
todas
I
as
want to
organizações
thank
de
the Service for Land
trabalhadores
and Natural
que se
Resources Forum and
articulam
all of
nesse
the different
fórum para
organizations that are
debater
here
esse
together to
importante tema,
discuss
que é a ocupação
such
dos
an
territórios
interesting
por
topic,
empresas
the important
estrangeiras
topic, which is the
e os impactos
occupation
sobre as
of
populações.
territories by foreign
Se as
companies and the
empresas, o
embargoes
capital,
these causes on
ele circula
populations.
mundialmente,
And I will also be talking
preciso, é
about the
indispensável que os
capital that is
trabalhadores
moved
também se
globally. And this
articulam
is something
e se
that
articulem e compreendam uns aos
that
outros para a
demands different
montagem
workers to
de
understand
uma
each other
estratégia
so that
comum
we can set
de
up a
enfrentamento
common
a esse
strategy for
capital.
us to really
Gostaria também
face
de agradecer
this
ao
problem
convite
together.
para
I would also
participar
like to thank
desse
you for the
debate
invitation to
e espero
participate
que minha
in this event,
experiência
and I really
os
hope that
apontamentos
my
que eu trago aqui
experience and also the
possam
remarks that I'll be
contribuir
sharing with you
efetivamente no
can
debate.
contribute to
Eu
your
sou
debate.
Júnior
I
Fidelis,
am
sou
Junior
filho de
Fidelis,
agricultores
and
no
I
Brasil.
am
Atualmente eu
son
sou
of
procurador
rural
federal,
producers in Brazil.
uma
Currently, I'm a
espécie de
federal
advogado
prosecutor,
público
a kind
da
of public
Advocacia
lawyer,
Geral da
if you
União.
will.
E a maioria da minha experiência
And most
profissional,
of my
eu exerci a
experience
advocacia pública na Agência de Terras Brasileira,
comes from
que é o Instituto
this
Nacional de
area. I
Colonização
used
e
to
Reforma
work at the
Agrária.
National
No
Institute
Brasil,
of
é o
Colonization
responsável,
and a greater
ou
agrarian
deveria
reform
ser o
and land reform in
responsável,
Brazil, which is the
já que nós
institute
vamos ver ali à
that is
frente que os
responsible
controles
or
são
that should be
ineficientes,
responsible
deveria
for
ser o
this. But we will be
responsável
seeing that the controls
pelo
are
controle
rather
da aquisição
inefficient,
de
but this
imóveis por
institution should be
estrangeiros no Brasil.
responsible for controlling
Então, a minha
the land
proposta é
acquisition in
apresentar
Brazil. So today, my
panorama
proposal
da
is to
regulação
give you an
jurídica
overview
da
of
aquisição de
the
terras por estrangeiros no
legal
Brasil.
regulation of land acquisition by foreigners in Brazil.
Bom, eu inicio essa apresentação
I will be
partindo
starting
da nossa
my
referência
presentation
máxima, que atualmente é a nossa Constituição Federal de
talking about
1988,
our federal
que é
constitution
a
of
nossa lei maior
1988, which is
vigente no
our
Brasil, editada logo
most
após termos
important
saído
legislation in
do
Brazil, and
processo de
which was
ruptura
published right
democrática
after we
e do processo
left a
de
process of democratic
militarização do Brasil,
disruption,
da administração
a process
brasileira,
of
que
militarization
ocorreu entre
in
64 e
between
1985.
64 and
Então, a nossa
85,
Constituição de
we had
1988,
legalization of our
ela
country.
estabelece,
So the
é o
Constitution of
artigo 190,
1988
que a
established
lei regulará
Article
e limitará a
190,
aquisição
which
ou arrendamento de
says that the
propriedade
law will
rural por
regulate
pessoa
and limit the
física ou
acquisition or
jurídica estrangeira.
leasing of
Então,
rural
do ponto
property
de
by
vista
foreign
de
individuals or
legislação
legal entities. So from a
constitucional,
legislative
do
point
ponto
of
de vista
view, from a
principiológico,
constitutional
mais que
point
isso, nós
of
temos uma
view,
determinação muito
we
clara
have a
da
very
nossa lei
clear
máxima, no
determination
sentido
of
de que
our
haverá uma
law in the
regulamentação
sense that
e um
we
limite
are going to
à
have a
aquisição de terras
regulation and
e o
there will be
arrendamento de
limits
terras por
to
estrangeiros no
foreigners
Brasil.
acquiring land
Acho
or
que esse é um
leasing rural
paradigma
properties in
normativo
Brazil. So
muito
I think this is
importante
a very
e do qual nós não
important
podemos esquecer
paradigm
e não
that
podemos
we
nos
cannot
afastar.
neglect
Embora nós vamos
and we cannot
perceber
move
que na
away from,
prática
even though we will
falta
see that in
aos órgãos de
practice
Estado dar efetividade para que a aquisição seja de
our
fato limitada
state bodies
ou
are
regulada no
not
Brasil.
effectively implementing
E
this.
uma das causas, talvez, dessa ausência de
And one
limitação
of the
é que a
causes
lei ainda
of this
vigente e
lack
que
of
disciplina
limits
essa
is that the
aquisição
current
é a Lei
law
5.709 de 71. Vejam vocês
conducting
que a
all of this
lei
is law number
dá cumprimento à Constituição é
5709.
anterior à sua edição.
This law
Então, de pronto, nós já
has
precisamos
been
identificar que o
around
Brasil
before the
necessita
Constitution. So this
atualizar
shows that
sua
Brazil needs
legislação
to update
que
its
trata da
legislation
aquisição e do arrendamento de terras por
on
estrangeiros.
land acquisition
A lei
and
de
leasing
1993, a Lei
in addition to
8629 de
this law, we have a
1993,
law
portanto,
from
posterior à
1993,
Constituição,
which was implemented after the Constitution.
ela determinou apenas que o arrendamento
It
das terras por estrangeiros se dará
stipulates
para o arrendamento,
that
se aplicarão as
lease
mesmas
of
regras da Lei
rural
5.709 de
will
71,
comply
de
with the
forma
same rules
que
of
tanto o
law
arrendamento quanto a aquisição
5709
estão hoje
from
disciplinadas
1971.
por essa
So
Lei
this means
5.709,
that leasing
que
and land
sabidamente
acquisition
é
is
insuficiente
something
para dar
that
conta
is
da realidade
under the
atual,
realm of law
sobretudo da situação de financiarização do capital,
which does not
financiarização da terra,
deal with the
já
problems that
mencionada
we
pelo
have today,
Felipe e
especially
pela
the
Jaqueline.
financialization of land and other
E como
problems that
que
were
a
mentioned by
nossa
Philip and
legislação
Jaqueline.
trata, então, o
So
capital
how does
internacional
our
que propõe
legislation
a adquirir
address
terra no Brasil?
international
Bom,
capital in
primeiro,
Brazil?
essa lei se
Well,
aplica a pessoas
first,
jurídicas
this law
estrangeiras
is applied
autorizadas a
to
funcionar no
foreign
Brasil.
legal entities
E nós temos
authorized to
pouquíssimas
operate in
pessoas
Brazil. We
jurídicas
have very
financeiras
few
autorizadas a funcionar
foreign
no
legal
Brasil.
entities that
O
are
capital
authorized to
opta
operate in Brazil.
por atuar no Brasil não sob a personalidade jurídica estrangeira, mas sob a
One, the
personalidade
capital
jurídica
operates in
brasileira,
Brazil, not
de modo
under
que,
a foreign
ao partir do
legal
momento em que ela é
entity, but
constituída
under
sob as leis
Brazilian legal
brasileiras,
entities, which
ela
means
ganha
that
a
when
natureza
they
jurídica de
they are
empresa
incorporated under the
brasileira,
Brazilian laws,
embora
they
controlada
become
por
Brazilian legal
capital
entities,
estrangeiro.
even
A
though
grande
they are
maioria das
controlled
empresas
by foreign
que
capital.
atuam hoje
Most companies that operate today
no Brasil, elas
in
atuam
Brazil
nessa perspectiva,
are
sob a perspectiva de pessoa jurídica
operating as
brasileira
Brazilian legal
controlada
entities,
por
even though they
estrangeiro.
are
Então,
controlled by
embora
foreign
elas
capital.
sejam pessoas
So,
jurídicas
This means
brasileiras,
that even
o
though
controle
they
acionário,
are under
seja em razão da
this
maioria do seu
umbrella of
capital,
Brazilian legal
ou seja em
entities,
razão
their
de quem
shareholders,
efetivamente tem o poder de mando,
to the majority of its
o controle
capital
dessas
stock,
ações estão,
or
o controle dessas empresas
the
está
power,
em
we
mãos
can see that the
estrangeiras.
control of these entities
Somente a
are in the
partir
hands
de
of foreign
2010,
companies.
com esse
Just
parecer
from
da AGU, da Advocacia Geral da União de 2010,
onwards, with
é que as pessoas
this
jurídicas controladas por
legislation
estrangeiros
from our
passaram a
office,
ser
we saw
equiparadas
that
a
Brazilian
pessoas
legal
jurídicas
entities
estrangeiras.
controlled by
Significa
foreign
dizer
companies were
que
now
até
being controlled the
2010,
same way as
as
foreign
pessoas
legal
jurídicas
entities. This means that
brasileiras,
until
mas
2010,
controladas
Brazilian
por
legal
estrangeiros,
entities that were
por serem
controlled
pessoas
by
jurídicas
foreigners,
brasileiras, poderiam
because
adquirir
they were
livremente
considered
imóveis rurais
Brazilian
no
legal
Brasil.
entities, they could
Desse
acquire
fato, eu já
real
adianto
estate
uma
in Brazil
consequência,
freely.
que é que
This, of
qualquer
course, has had
estatística
consequences.
sobre os imóveis rurais hoje em poder
Whatever
de estrangeiros,
statistic
elas
that we
não são
have today
estatísticas reais.
regarding foreign
Elas
legal
representam
entity
apenas
land
uma fração
acquisition, they are
ínfima
not real, they
daquilo
just
que de
represent
fato
a very
está
negligible
sob o
number
controle
of what
dos
is
estrangeiros que
happening
se
in
organizam na
reality,
forma de
meaning
pessoa
the amount
jurídica
of land
estrangeira,
that
mas
is under the
controlada pelo
control
capital
of
estrangeiro.
foreign capital
E
that
o que
was
diz a nossa
under the
lei?
umbrella of
Nesse
Brazilian
ponto,
legal
me parece
entities
que a
before.
lei em si,
Whatever law
ela não
says,
não tem uma
at this
solução
point,
ruim,
I think
ou
that
pelo
the
menos
legislation does
apresenta
not
uma
present a
solução
bad
razoável,
solution, or at
por
least I
assim
think
dizer.
it's a reasonable solution, if you will.
Eu vou apresentar aqui as
I
principais
will be
restrições,
presenting here the
né?
main
E essas restrições
restrictions
dá
that
sobretudo
we
em relação a
have,
limites de
and
área
they
para a
are
aquisição,
especially
em
regarding
relação
the
às
limits
pessoas
of
físicas, às pessoas
area
naturais
for
ou às
acquisitions
pessoas
regarding
jurídicas, as
individuals and
empresas
also legal
adquirem imóveis
entities,
no Brasil.
meaning
Então, até
corporations that
3
can
meses,
acquire land
a
in
aquisição é
Brazil.
livre.
So
E
up
MEI,
to 3
ou
MIEs,
módulo de exploração
are
indefinida,
indefinite
é uma
exploitation
referência de
modules.
medida de área
This
adotada
is
no
a
Brasil, que
measurement
oscila entre
reference
5
adopted in
e 10
Brazil that
hectares.
ranges from 5 to
Lembrando
100
que hectare de terra é
Let's
10
keep
mil
in
metros
mind that
quadrados.
1 hectare equals
De
10,000
modo
square
que
meters.
até 3 meses, ou seja,
So
até
up to
30 mil metros
MEIs,
quadrados,
meaning
a
up
pessoa
to
física
30,000
estrangeira
square
que
meters,
resida no Brasil
foreigners
pode
residing in
adquirir
Brazil
livremente
can
imóveis rurais no
freely
Brasil.
acquire
Entre
rural
3 e
property
50
in
meses, ela
Brazil.
depende de autorização do INCRA,
Between
sem
5
projeto de exploração, ou
20,
seja, ela não
between
precisa
3 to 20
declarar, ou se
MEIs, they need to
comprometer
have
em
an
como
authorization
vai
by
explorar essa
INCRA
terra,
without
e
any
acima de
kind of
50 meses,
exploitation
ela
project.
precisa
Meaning they don't need to
apresentar
say
um
how they're
projeto
going to
de
use the land.
exploração.
And up to
Acima de 50
above
meses,
20
pode
MEIs,
adquirir,
they need to present a
contudo,
project.
com autorização do
Above
Congresso Nacional
50
e com projeto de
MEIs, they
exploração.
need to have approval from
Raras
the
são as
Congress and they
pessoas
need
que
to have
conseguem
an
obter essa
exploitation
autorização do
project. It's not very
Parlamento
common
brasileiro em
for
razão da
legal
dificuldade desse
entities
processo.
to have
De
this
modo que as
approval from
aquisições
Congress because it's a very
por
hard
estrangeiros,
process.
pessoas físicas,
So
elas se
land
dão,
acquisition
na
by
maioria dos casos,
foreigners, by
em até
individuals,
50
they
meses,
will
módulos de
normally
exploração
happen up to
indefinidas.
50
Já as pessoas jurídicas podem
but
adquirir
legal entities,
até
they can acquire
imóveis
up to
com áreas de até 100
100
MEIs, sempre
MEIs,
com autorização do INCRA e com projeto de
always
exploração
with
agropecuária
an
aprovado.
authorization from
A
INCRA and
perspectiva
also
é
with
que a pessoa
an
jurídica, a
exploitation
perspectiva ou a
project
razão
approved.
dessa necessidade de apresentação de projeto de exploração
So the
é que a
need
pessoa
for the
jurídica não
presentation of
adquira
this
ou não
project
deveria adquirir imóveis rurais no Brasil
is
apenas
so
com fins especulativos,
foreigners will not be
como reserva de
acquiring
capital,
lands in Brazil
mas com a
as
finalidade
capital
de
reserve,
tornar esse
but
imóvel
actually
produtivo
with
e
the
atender a
objective
uma
of making
racionalidade
these
ao
properties
interesse
productive
econômico
and
e social.
meeting, of course,
Além desse limite de
our
aquisição por área, por
social
pessoa,
and
nós
economic
temos um outro
interests.
limite, que é a
In addition to
aquisição
these
de área
limits that we
por
have, we
município,
also have other limits
uma
for
unidade
acquisition
administrativa
per
brasileira.
municipalities, which are
Então, no
administrative
máximo,
units that we have
25%
here
da
in
área
Brazil.
do
So a
município
maximum of 25%
poderia ser
of
adquirida
the
por
area
estrangeiros, de modo que se nós
of the
tivéssemos
municipality can be
todos os
acquired by
municípios
foreigners. And if we had all
adquiridos no limite
municipalities
por estrangeiros,
acquired
1/4 do território brasileiro poderia
according to their
eventualmente
limits,
ser adquirido
1/4
por
of our
pessoas
Brazilian
físicas
territory
ou
could be
jurídicas
acquired by
estrangeiras.
foreigners, by
E
individuals,
por nacionalidade,
also by
apenas
foreign legal
40% da área
entities.
adquirida em
And
cada
regarding area
município
per nationality, only 40%
podem
of
ser
the area
adquiridas pela mesma
acquired per
nacionalidade.
municipality could be acquired by the same
Essa regra, essa
nationality.
restrição,
This rule,
visa
this
impedir
restriction
enclaves de
aims
nacionalidades
to
estrangeiras dentro do território nacional. Essa seria
groups
a razão.
of
E na
nationalities
faixa de fronteira, nós temos
acquiring
uma necessidade de uma
a lot
autorização
of land in
adicional
the
e
same
específica
area.
do
And of
Conselho de
course, we
Defesa
also
Nacional, que
have to
dificulta
have
ainda
some
mais o
specific
procedimento
authorizations
e,
from
por
our
razões
National
de
Defense
interesse
Council,
da
which
Defesa
makes
Nacional,
the
essa
process a little
aquisição
bit
poderá
harder.
ser
And
negada.
many times
Bom,
this acquisition can be
consideradas essas diretrizes
taking
básicas
into
de
consideration
regulação,
these basic
acho que nós precisaremos
regulations and guidelines.
precisamos
I think
pensar
that we
como se
need
dá o
to now
controle e a
think about
fiscalização
how we
dessas
supervise
regras.
and
E
control
aqui talvez nós
these rules.
tenhamos
How do
as
we
nossas
enforce
maiores
these rules?
dificuldades.
And
Bom,
here
o
we
responsável
find a lot of
por essa
difficulties. First,
fiscalização é o
regarding
Instituto
the
Nacional
ones in
de
charge
Colonização e
for
Reforma
this
Agrária, a
supervision,
Agência
for this
Brasileira de
oversight. We
Terras,
have the INCRA,
que se
which is the
daria
National
mediante
Institute
uma
for
autorização
Colonization and
prévia
a
à
greater reform.
aquisição.
So,
E a única sanção
normally, according to our
possível
regulation,
seria a
for
invalidade dessa aquisição
acquisition, these companies
com o
would need to
retorno
have prior approval.
desse imóvel, uma vez tornado inválido, a
Regarding
aquisição com
sanctions,
retorno dessa
if the
propriedade
acquisition is not
ao
approved,
alienante, ou
the
seja, ao vendedor.
property needs to be returned
De
to
todo
the
modo, o
seller.
que nós temos é uma difícil fiscalização,
But what we see in
porque nós não
reality
temos
is
nenhum
a lot
mecanismo
of
de comunicação entre
because we
os
do not have any
órgãos,
kind
ou
of
no caso
communication
brasileiro, dos
mechanism
cartórios,
across
que são os
different
responsáveis
bodies and
pela
across notaries' offices in
efetiva
Brazil that
transferência
are
da propriedade
responsible for
ao Instituto Nacional de Colonização de
tenures
Terra.
and
Temos
transferring these
as previsões
tenures
que temos,
to
elas são
our
insuficientes,
institutes.
e
We
mesmo
see that
quando
we do
são
not have
comunicadas,
enough
o INCRA não é capaz de perseguir
resources to
esses
deal with
atos
that.
buscando a declaração de sua
And we see
invalidade.
that we do not have
Então,
enough staff
some-se a isso
also
a
implement
dificuldade
these
que nós
sanctions.
temos
In addition,
no
we
caso
also
da
see a lot of
fiscalização
difficulties when it
das
comes to
mudanças de controle
oversight and
societário de
enforcement
pessoas jurídicas, tanto as de capital aberto,
in
mas sobretudo as de capital,
changes in
ou
corporate
tanto das de
control and
capital
public traded
fechado,
legal
mas sobretudo
entities.
daquelas de capital
This
aberto,
is our
em
biggest
especial
problem,
as
publicly
empresas
traded legal
brasileiras
entities, especially
que
Brazilian
transacionam
companies
seu capital
that
por meio de ações em bolsas de
have
valores. E
transactions
aqui, esse
in the
modelo,
stock
o
market.
Felipe já mencionou e já reportado
Philip has
também por
already talked
Jaqueline,
about
ele
this,
opera
and
no
Jacqueline
Brasil
has
a
touched
partir
on
dos fundos de
this
pensão,
model
dos
operates
fundos
in Brazil
imobiliários e as
through
empresas
pension
de
funds,
capital
real
aberto.
estate
Os
funds, and
controles
also
exercidos
public traded
pelos
legal
órgãos de
entities.
controle de
And the
capital no Brasil
control
não chegam ao
that is
controle
done
do
by our
capital,
bodies,
como
they
esse capital está
are not
investido.
able to
Esse capital
control
muitas das vezes está
when the
investido
capital is
em terras,
invested. Many times the
e
capital
mesmo
is
estando investido em
invested
terras,
in
essas
lands,
ações e
and
controles
even in
acionários
these cases,
são
we see
facilmente
that
transacionados e alterados
through
de poder,
shares,
sem
this
que o fato
control can be easily
de ele estar investido em imóveis seja ou configure impeditivo a transação desse
so
capital.
is not
Eu acho que o caso mais clássico que nós temos, ou pelo menos o mais
a
conhecido no
classic
Brasil,
or the most
é o dessa
common
empresa,
that we have in
a
Brazil
Brasil Agro,
is this
que ela é
company,
negociada
company
em
here,
bolsa de
Brazil
valores,
Agro, that
a
is
bolsa
traded
de valores do
in the
Brasil,
stock
sob o
market
código ou
in
ticket
Brazil,
Agro 3, de modo que qualquer
under
estrangeiro pode
the ticker
adquirir
Agro
suas
3,
ações
and any
livremente.
foreigner can
E ela
buy
tem,
shares
e
freely.
esses dados aqui
Shares
são
of this
abertos,
company
estão
freely.
no
These
portal
are
de relacionamento
some
com os
open data.
investidores
You
dela
can
na
find them on
internet.
the website, on the
Ela
website
tem
on the
como
internet.
objetivo declarado,
The
a Brasil
objective of
Agro
this
é uma das
company,
empresas brasileiras, é uma das maiores empresas
this
brasileiras
is
em
one of the
quantidade de terras
largest
agricultáveis,
companies when
com
it
foco
comes
na
to the
aquisição,
amount of rural
desenvolvimento,
property
exploração
they
e
have, and the
comercialização de
focus is to
propriedades rurais
acquire and
com aptidão
also
agropecuária.
trade rural
Eles próprios
properties
declaram que adquirem propriedades
geared
rurais
towards
que
agribusiness.
acreditam
So
ter
they
significativo
declare here
potencial
that
de
they
geração de
acquire
valor
rural
por
property
meio da
that they
manutenção do
believe
ativo.
have a lot of
Ou
value,
seja,
and
eles
that
não
they want
adquirem
to
propriedades com
maintain
o
this asset.
propósito de
This means
torná-las
that they do not
produtivas
acquire
ou de
properties to
obter
make them more
renda a partir da
productive or to
produção,
obtain
mas com o
income based
propósito
on
de
their production.
manutenção do
The
ativo,
main goal here is for them
com a
to hold
finalidade
this asset
de
and
valorizar esses
in
ativos e,
order
na
to
sequência,
make
aliená-los.
these assets
Quando
more
julgamos que o
valuable
valor das
and
propriedades
finally
rurais entrega o retorno
to sell
esperado,
them.
vendemos
So
tais
when we
propriedades rurais e
look at
realizamos
that,
os ganhos de
we
capital.
see that
Então, a
their
empresa
goal
tem
is to
por
gain
propósito
capital.
declarado
So
a
this,
aquisição de
their
terras no
declared
Brasil,
purpose here
para
is to
com essa
acquire
comercialização de
lands
terras,
in
comprar
Brazil,
barata
and
e vender cara,
the goal is to trade
realizar
these
ganhos de
lands
capital.
by buying
E essa
them at a
empresa,
lower
esse
price and
aqui
selling
é
them
o
at a higher price so
quadro
that
do
they can
controle
gain more
societário dela,
capital.
ela é controlada
This
hoje
here
pela
shows
Credisul,
their
que é uma empresa, um
partners.
grupo
Today it
financeiro
is
argentino.
controlled by
Ele detém
Credisul, which is a
38% do
financial
capital,
group
e
from
a Chrysler
Argentina
River, que tem
that has 38% of the
66,93%
capital
do
of this
capital.
company, and
Além de
it
outras
also has
pessoas
other
jurídicas, também
companies and
estrangeiras,
other legal entities,
e
again, foreign legal
uma
entities
parte
that
do controle
hold
pulverizado
a big
na
share
Bolsa de
of
Valores
this
sem
company. In
controle
addition, as
muito
I
preciso.
mentioned, there are a lot of shareholders
Essa
buying
terra, essa empresa,
shares
quem
from this
somos e o que
company and
fazemos, isso aqui é
controlling this
uma
company.
apresentação deles
This
mesmo.
is a presentation
Eles já
picture
adquiriram no
from
Brasil
this company, and
321
it
mil
shows
hectares
here
de
that
terras.
this company
E
already
desses
has
321 mil hectares de terras, eles já
321,000 hectares, and out
venderam
of the
97 mil.
these 321,000, they have already sold
Mais de
97,000. more than
4 hectares de terra, 144.300 hectares de terra desenvolvidos.
were
Então, os números não são baixos.
retired. So we're not
E aqui
talking
eles
about
apresentam
low numbers here. And here
aonde
you can see
eles estão instalados, não só no
where
Brasil,
this
mas no
company
Brasil,
operates
também
not
no
only in
Paraguai
Brazil, but also
e na Bolívia.
in
Esse mesmo
Paraguay
modelo
and
de negócio,
Bolivia, using the same
terras
business
adquiridas
model where they
com
acquire
o fim
land
puramente
at
especulativo,
a lower
eles
price.
praticam no Brasil, no Paraguai e na
And
Bolívia.
they have the same
Então,
model
a consequência desse
Paraguay
modelo,
and
eu diria
Bolivia.
que em breve
Well, regarding
síntese
the
eu apresento para
consequences
vocês,
of
ou
this
as
model,
principais
are here
consequências
summarized.
dessa
The main
ausência
consequences
de
of
um
this
controle mais
absence
rigoroso
of a
uma
more
ausência do
strict
controle e do
control.
conhecimento sobre as terras
And also,
brasileiras em
I would
controle
say that
estrangeiro. Qualquer estatística
a lot of
que
people
nós
don't
apresentemos hoje,
that
ela é
foreigners
apenas uma referência
hold
e
a large
certamente
number
ela é
of lands in
subestimada,
Brazil. Remember that these
mas certamente ela é
statistics here
válida para
are
termos a
definitely
dimensão do
underestimated,
problema.
but they are
Então, nós
definitely
temos uma
valid
pressão
for
do
us to
capital
understand also the
produtivo
dimension
e
of this
especulativo
problem.
por terra,
We have a pressure from
e
production
isso
and
faz com que
speculative
apresente uma
capital for
pressão
land.
muito
This,
grande
of
pela
course,
uma dificuldade muito grande na demarcação e na desafetação das terras brasileiras que estão protegidas ou que estão fora do mercado. E essas terras são, sobretudo, as terras indígenas, as unidades de conservação, seja as florestas públicas, florestas nacionais, as terras dos agricultores familiares e que não estão inseridas no modelo produtivo do agronegócio, as terras das populações tradicionais, como as populações quilombolas, ribeirinhas, e as terras públicas que o Brasil ainda detém sem destinação, sobretudo as terras situadas na Amazônia brasileira. É uma grande pressão que dificulta a demarcação e afetação dessas terras, ou quando já demarcadas e afetadas, pela desafetação para que elas possam se integrar a esse ao modelo de produção do agronegócio e integrar como capital a financiarização, esse modelo de financiarização. Um dos desafios que eu apresento aqui, apenas três grandes desafios que eu considero. Primeiro, uma revisão da legislação com o filtro constitucional, sobretudo a partir da função social da terra, uma exploração que favoreça o bem-estar dos proprietários, mas também dos trabalhadores e da sociedade, e o interesse nacional na destinação dessas terras como bem de produção limitados. As terras precisam estar destinadas à produção de alimentos, ao combate à fome, à preservação do meio ambiente, à preservação das tradicionalidades dos nossos povos e populações tradicionais. Aliada a essa revisão da legislação, nós precisamos instituir mecanismos de fiscalização, controle e sanção, sobretudo para esse modelo com o qual o capital se organiza e se apropria da terra atualmente, o modelo das companhias de capital aberto, dos fundos de pensão, dos fundos imobiliários. Nós não temos mecanismos hoje que deem conta sequer de ter conhecimento das terras que estão em poder dessas formas de organização do capital, muito menos de controlá-lo e, eventualmente, sancioná-los. E esse é o terceiro ponto que nós precisamos implementar, e as consequências para o descumprimento dessas restrições. Chegarmos ao ponto, por exemplo, de uma venda compulsória, a partir de uma notificação da situação de irregularidade, ou mesmo de um perdimento desse bem em proveito do Estado, e que possa ser destinado para a reforma agrária, para a regularização dos territórios dos camponeses. Bom, breve síntese é isso. Agradeço a oportunidade, espero ter contribuído e fico à disposição de todos.
Muito obrigado, Júnior Fidelis. Quero mais uma vez agradecer você por ter aceitado esse convite, para nós da CONTAG, tem uma significância muito grande essa sua exposição, até porque traz alguns elementos que para nós a gente também, enquanto CONTAG, não conhecia, né, com profundidade, que talvez a gente possa depois continuar conversando para aprofundar mais ainda, né? Mas fique à vontade, participa do nosso evento aí, e depois dos desdobramentos também, no decorrer dos 30 dias. Nós agora vamos ouvir um depoimento de pessoas que estão em comunidades afetadas por esse negócio de estrangeirização da terra, de financiarização da terra. Então, para fazer o depoimento agora, nós vamos convidar a companheira Mara Alves. Ela é representante do coletivo dos povos e comunidades do Cerrado e afetada diretamente por investimentos estrangeiros no Brasil. A companheira Mara, ela é do estado do Piauí e também ela é da articulação da Comissão Pastoral da Terra, nossa CPT, que é uma grande parceira nossa nessa grande luta aqui no Brasil. Companheira Mara, é com você.
Olá, bom dia a todos.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for your invitation. I was watching the presentations, so I don't really know how to speak about this more generally, but I can talk to you about what we go through, what we see, what our lives are like. So we see a great expansion of deforestation. So first I'm going to talk about where I come from. I'm from the south of the state of Piauí. So here we have a lot of deforestation in our cerrados, our savannas. And so they're coming very close to our communities. The communities are being limited by these deforestation. A lot of the land grabbers, they come here, they carry out deforestation. Sometimes we accuse them in the justice system, and then they stop, and then a big company buys that land from then on, and that's when they start planting.
Então,
So for us who need the land, it's led to a lot of suffering, this land grabbing. And these small-time land grabbers, they say that they're the owners of the land, but we've been there our whole lives, and we need that land. And sometimes we're thrown out of the land. Thank God we have the support of the CPT, the Land Pastor Organization, but we're being constantly limited, threatened, and it's very, very complicated. So I'm a part of a group, the collective of peoples of the Cerrado, and we created this group to be able to support each other. Just 1 minute, sorry.
Eu peço desculpa para vocês que minha menina estava aqui chorando.
I apologize, my little girl was crying. So I have a quick presentation talking a little bit about what's going on with a few pictures and Alonso, could you share your screen, please? And then I'll comment on what's going on. So here we have a picture of our community. Our community is a traditional community, a riverside community. We have swamplands on the other side, and we need this water. And it's vital for us as a riverside, swampside communities for our living, for our survival. And this is our community. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So here I have some comments. I'm a part of the communal collective of peoples and communities of the Cerrado, the Brazilian Savannah. This collective was created to try to help us because we've been suffering a lot of threats. A lot of people have already been taken away from their lands. A lot of people have been thrown out of the communities because we have been thrown out by people who say that they are the owners of the land, but they're not really the owners, they're land grabbers. So we want to have land titles. With the titling of this territory, we would have a little bit more peace of mind, even though this is not the end of all of these problems, because there are a lot of people who don't respect these titles, even if we have the documents. But at least it would help us to say, this is our land. So they have a lot of money, they're able to have lawyers. So we live there. We have this land should be ours. We've had a couple small advances, but we still don't have the land titles in our hands. We're trying to get the collective land title. What's a collective land title? It's a title for the whole community. This land can't be sold. It's for common use. Everyone can use, in the community can use this land, and it can't be sold in any way. So this is what we want. Why do we want that? Because we don't want this land to be ever sold. This is where we live. This is where we survive. We need it for our survival. We want to have safety so that we are sure that we won't be thrown out of our lands. And this is our situation in our communities. They're impacted by small and large farms. So there's a lot of deforestation. These farms are very thirsty for new land. They want to expand. They want to advance on our lands to plant soy. So they're getting very close to the lowlands near our community. Our community, Barra da Lagoa, there's a farmer who's come to the riverside where there is a burichi, a palm tree area, and it's only 1-2 kilometers away from our community. So they're advancing very close to our community. We've been suffering a lot. We're impacted by the poison that they used. We have water samples, and we see that we have a lot of agricultural poisons in our water, and it's terrible for our crops as well. We've been very much limited in our freedom by this farmer, so we're living in a constant state. Well, let's say our day-to-day lives are not easy, so we are fighting so that we don't have to leave our place, our territory. A lot of these farms have resources from foreign companies. We have large farms here in the south of Piauí. We know there are foreign funds investing in them, and they want to expand more and more. They want to advance on our territories. Here in Piauí, there's a huge farm with 5 units, and we know they have foreign investors, and a lot of communities are being impacted by this large farm. So these baixões, which are lowlands, these are the places where we live, and these companies are coming closer and closer, these large farms. A variety of different communities have been affected, and we have this collective, and every year we have a meeting to debate what are we going to do to strengthen ourselves and to help each other. Here we have some of the problems that are faced by the community. That I mentioned, we have contaminated water. Our crops are getting diminished year by year. It's very hard for us to find good wood for our fences and homes because they're deforesting everything. The flora and fauna, and which includes the animals we hunt, are going down more and more. The native fruits are harder and harder to find because with the destruction of nature, all of these things happen. So the rivers are drying up. They're lower and lower, less and less water. Why? Because the land is deforested. So the land starts, erosion happens, and there's more and more soil inside the rivers, where space is limited for instance, growing animals, for husbandry. And so we need to leave our animals inside fences. And for those of us who don't have large pastures, then we need to kill our animals or sell our animals. And one of our main problems is that we're scared. We have fear that we won't be able to live in our homes, that we'll be kicked out of our very homes. And we're scared of all the threats that we suffer constantly. And here we have some images some pictures of deforestation near our community. Here we have a picture of them setting fire near our communities. Every year we suffer a lot with these fires that they set. A lot of fires, illegal criminal fires being set. Here's one of the demarcators that were placed there by Intapi, but the fire went right over them. This is supposed to be our land. So, without our land and our territory, well, we won't be able to survive, because that's where we get all our sustenance. We don't have a condition of going somewhere else. We can't go somewhere else, buy other land. So we need this. This is our life. We were born there. Our parents, our grandparents were born there. So these communities, they need to have more support, because there are a lot of communities which have already been finished. They've been kicked out. There are a lot of them that are suffering these pressures. They're trying to not leave their territories, because where do you want to go? Where can you go? What are you going to live from? So there's no other option for us. What we need is to have support to keep our lands. We need the land titles so that we can say, look, we're not going to leave this place. Our communities need to be seen. They need to be helped, so that these lands from traditional communities and peoples need to be protected. I think we need to have public policies for these peoples, for these communities, because if we don't have these public policies, well, at least our lands don't have any sort of assistance. Thank God we have the support of the Land Pastoral Organization, the CPT, and so we're fighting to remain in our land, in our territory. So here I have some images from our community of our river. Here we are harvesting rice, a communal harvesting. Everyone's helping each other. Look at our wealth that we have here. We have waters, rivers, the Burichi palm trees. It's life. So I wanted to show you a little bit of these pictures so that you could see what our community is like. I wanted to, I talked about all of our problems, but I wanted to show you a little bit of our day-to-day life and all the happiness that we have when we're in our own place. All we need is some support, some peace, really. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Mara, por tu intervención.
Thank you so much, Mara, for your intervention. I think it was very important, so that we can make these things a little bit more concrete, all these elements, these theoretical, conceptual elements that we've heard from the other participants. So we'd like to invite you all to participate with your questions and comments. And I also like to remind you that we have the Q&A and chat functions on Zoom, so that you can ask questions to the panelists, and so that you can ask general questions as well, and also so that you can make comments. So now we'd like to open the floor to this moment, this debate and question and answers period. We have a question from Christina Timponi. I think it would be a question more for Philip, or to maybe another question. This question is in English, so I'm going to read it in English.
How do you see
And it
the
says,
European Union recent due diligence regulations to track and make European business accountable when acting overseas? Can this be effective? What are the challenges? Philip, si de pronto.
Philip, if you want to answer.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I guess I think it became very clear that in the different presentations that, the question is not if we need regulations, but what specific regulations do we need to avoid these kinds of things? So you're referring to a legislation that obliges companies, corporations that are registered in the European Union to ensure or to demonstrate that throughout their supply chain there is no human rights violations and also environmental crimes. I think it's a good step, but I think it's insufficient. I think we are now in the process that this law is being applied. I think it has created some awareness and some sensitivity in companies about the need to have more to ensure or to check what is happening in their supply chain. But I do think that still for the issue of land and what we are speaking here, specifically when we look into the actions of the operations of financial actors, I think there are too many loopholes, right? Because I think such a regulation can help in situations where you have a clear, let's say, you can trace a supply chain, right? So I mean, you can trace I don't know, soy exports from Brazil to the European Union, and you can make that clear. But and you can trace that supply chain back to a specific location. And I think there are cases where that is the case. And I think in that sense, the law is interesting, or the legal framework. But when you look at the operations of financial actors, I think what is one of the characteristics is that we can have some kind of a delinking between speculation with land and actually what happens with the land in terms of production, right? And when you have like these investment webs where you have that the effective control is in the hands of financial actors that are difficult to locate and whose relationship with the actual production process is not so clear, I think such a law is not, it's just not sufficient to address the issue, or at least it leaves too many loopholes open. And I want to take up maybe just also because there was another question also from, I think it was Isolechi, who asked also about international initiatives and what the Mercosur could do. So I'm not. I will leave the Mercosur questions to people who are better informed on that. What I think is an interesting and a relevant process, which is also in which many organizations are participating. It's a broad coalition who is working on this to get a United Nations treaty to regulate transnational corporations. This is an ongoing process, so the negotiations are ongoing. As you can imagine, it's a very difficult negotiation because many countries are opposed to such a legislation. But among civil society and the social movement groups, I think there is a strong push also to ensure that the transnational transactions that are to be regulated by this treaty also include financial operations and financial transactions, right? Because that's obviously, it's often a loophole. And I think this is also what we saw today, that when it comes to purely financial transactions, it's too easy as of now for corporations, banks, investors of all kinds to circumvent even the laws, even where there are actually good laws in place. So I think that is one initiative that is ongoing, and I think which deserves to be supported. I know that there is a lot of criticism about the UN, and rightly so, but I do think that still it's probably the most legitimate forum of tackling such an issue. And because you mentioned also the OECD, but I would think that the UN in principle should be a more democratic forum, because we have countries of the global south, including from Latin America, who are actively also supporting this process, obviously also always kind of defending their interests. But I think those are the things that are there. So I think those are perhaps some thoughts on these questions of the possibilities for international regulation of these kind of existing regulations and regulations that are in the process of being developed.
Gracias, Philippe, por estos elementos.
Thank you, Philip, for your contributions. We also have a question from Isolete.
De repente puede ser para Junior o para Jacqueline.
I think that would be for Jacqueline or Junior, because they're in the Latin American Brazilian context. And this is the question. In countries like Brazil, we have a direct relation with international capital. We can connect it to foreign occupation or the financialization of lands and forests. How can we debate this issue in the Mercosur debates? I think we will only be able to do this if we can articulate our struggle in such a way that we can impact the investors. So I think Jacqueline or Junior, you can take the floor.
Yo quería comentar algunas cosas, incluso de la anterior, que posiblemente esté vinculada a esta pregunta también.
I just wanted to comment on a few things that were connected to the previous presentation, previous answer as well. So if we're thinking about Mercosur, the legislation we have, well, each country needs to work with its own legislation to protect the rights of their peoples, and the agreements aren't always very simple in the Mercosur context. So government changes, if they go to the right, for instance, this led to a huge setback in the issue of protection of peasant agriculture, indigenous agriculture, and family agriculture in the past. But the advance of land grabbing, large corporations, and financialization of land goes beyond the legislation. The legislation has not adequated itself to these changes. So we need changes in the legislation so that we can contemplate these different kinds of land tenure issues that we have, including human rights issues, the points of view of communities and indigenous people, the point of view of the land's health, and we need to include the control here. So Junior talked about this. We really need to fight for this, as Mara mentioned. This is our home, this is our land, this needs to be in our laws and in the control of the land tenure process itself. We still have not been able to reach a point where we are adequately following these changes, because economic powers and interests are very strong, and governments have not advanced in the same pace as these actors for protection. So we've had a lot of setbacks during the right-wing governments. There were huge steps back in Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. Well, there were so many of them. So we have this deficit. I think that legislation is a very important component, but legislation in and of itself, well, beyond it, we have the issue of coordination, alliances, being able to make alliances. I think this is also very important because defending land and defending human rights and defending sovereignty, food sovereignty, all of this has always been in the hand of these organizations, including the defense of human rights advances and people's rights. So maybe the people's questions about how we can build this process in this framework. So building alliances is very important. It's a very important aspect. So we need these spaces that articulate the connections between civil society organizations, and having a platform for a common struggle is very important. So we have the family agriculture meeting in Mercosur. Brazil has had a very important effort in this meeting. We've advanced quite a bit in Uruguay as well. We've been also trying to follow Brazil's policies when they were doing this. Argentina has also created secretariat for family agriculture. So these spaces are very important, and civil society organizations and social movements need to go together with public institutions. And we're only going to change the situation that we have and these realities in different countries. And we need to deal with this attack against human rights and how these processes happen. We also have cultural differences. Not all the peoples react in the same way to these areas. So Uruguay has a government right now that does not prioritize access to land and family production. It took away resources from the land colonization institute that supported family agriculture, and now the civil society organizations are making complaints about this. So we still have not been answered the requests from these institutions. So like Mara mentioned, this sector needs a lot of support and assistance. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your answer. Is there someone? I would like to have a question, make a question as well.
We in India are faced with the huge land grab and land broke the marketplace, while millions are without land. Convergence of people's struggle for access to land and livelihood resources is an important task. Please suggest ways to achieve it. Can FIAN take a lead role?
I guess that question is directed to me. You want me to answer it? Christian, because I feel very humbled by this request. I mean, humbled in the sense that it coming from Ekta Parishad, which is such a impressive movement in India, and I think you are so. Yeah, you have done so important struggles in India, and that's in a way I feel humbled by such a request, because I feel that FIAN is an organization. I mean, we do what we can to support struggles all around the world on land, and we are happy to. Happy to support, and we are supporting also many of alliances. I think there are many initiatives of alliances. I guess in this very space where we are, this is also a space of convergence of movements from around the world to take these struggles forward, and so we feel very committed to it with our capacities as an international NGO. But I don't know if we are actually we should have the leading role. We see our role more as a supporting role to grassroots struggles, but but yeah, I guess the question is how to, I mean, I mentioned the convergence and like the need for a convergence in my presentation, and I do think that it is very relevant, and the question is, as I said earlier, it's we can probably all agree on it, but the question is like, how do we build it? What I can say is that I think there is, I mean, apart from the different alliances that there are, I think it's probably also one moment of convergence could also be a new global forum on food sovereignty, which is being in the process of being prepared. The International Committee for Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, the IPC, is having the lead on it, but it's intended to be a broad articulation, bringing together movements in the next year. But it will be an entire process. So I think, and that's something that we as FIAN are also engaged in, and where I think like the different networks that we have to find those convergent spaces and put our energies together, and yeah, but we are here to support, but I feel strongly that the leadership should be with social organizations on the ground, of rights holders, of peasants, small-scale food producers. But yeah, I think we're all here to scale up our struggles, and let's find the best way to do it.
Eu gostaria de contribuir também, posso?
I'd also like to make some remarks. Can I?
Sim, Júnior.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tá. Eu gostaria de alguma forma, dialogar com uma
I'd like
segunda
to
questão.
somehow dialogue with
Junior,
the second question.
o Jacqueline, se querem aportar.
Sim. Eu gostaria de dialogar com a primeira questão e com a segunda, quanto à possibilidade de regulamentos contribuírem na regulação do capital, mecanismos como a União Europeia, como a OCDE, contribuírem na regulação desse capital que aporta no Brasil, na América Latina, na África, na Ásia, na forma de investimentos em terras. E também a segunda questão que foi colocada sobre a diferenciação entre um capital nacional e um capital estrangeiro. Qual a diferenciação entre eles? Bem, eu diria que, para a perspectiva dos impactados por essa onda do mercado, por esse modelo de financiarização, como a Mara, que nos apresentou aqui a realidade de sua comunidade e os efeitos que eles sofrem, para esse tipo de realidade não faz nenhuma diferença se o capital financeiro tem origem no Brasil, na Argentina, na Europa, nos Estados Unidos, ou se é um capital nacional, ou se é um capital estrangeiro. A forma como ele se organiza e como ele se apropria da natureza e expropria as populações naturais dos seus as populações locais dos recursos naturais, ela é sentida da mesma forma. Para a Mara não faz diferença se quem está expulsando ela e sua comunidade de suas terras, se é um capital brasileiro, se é argentino, se é europeu, ou se é um capital americano, norte-americano. O que eu acho que faz diferença é na forma como nós podemos e devemos controlar esse capital. E nesse ponto, eu entendo que mecanismos como a OCDE, como a União Europeia, como o Mercosul, podem e devem contribuir nessa regulação. Não me parece fazer muito sentido que a regulação, que a cobrança para que esse capital tenha uma destinação minimamente civilizatória e minimamente produtiva seja esperada apenas no destino, em quem sofre os impactos. Mas é necessário também na origem. Esse capital que muitas das vezes é formado com fundo de pensão ou com investidores da classe média europeia, professores, com operários, com profissionais liberais que pensam e pretendem apenas ter uma aposentadoria no futuro. Esse capital não pode ser utilizado para provocar miséria e genocídio na América Latina. Aqui no Brasil eu vejo uma divergência entre o capital internacional e o capital brasileiro apenas sob o ponto de vista de uma disputa entre esses dois capitais, mas na mesma lógica capitalista burguesa. Enquanto o capital nacional quer restringir, ou frações do capital nacional deseja restringir a entrada de capital estrangeiro no Brasil, ele apenas o faz sob a ótica de uma reserva de mercado, para evitar a concorrência para a qual ele eventualmente não esteja preparado em relação ao capital nacional. Mas para fim de impacto desse capital é o mesmo. E nesse sentido que eu acho que o capital estrangeiro precisa ser regulado também na origem. Nós precisamos de encontrar mecanismos para que o investidor pequeno, médio, poupador da Europa, dos Estados Unidos, não possa estar contribuindo com a dizimação das populações nativas no Brasil ou em qualquer lugar da América Latina. Não sei muito bem como fazer isso, mas acredito que esse deve ser também um foco das nossas reflexões e das nossas proposições futuras. Obrigado.
Gracias, Junior. No sé si Jacqueline quisiera añadir algo.
No, está bien. Estoy de acuerdo con esto que planteaba Junior, de que más allá del origen, digamos, de los fondos y de cómo, si son extranjeros, si son nacionales, si son regionales, el tema siempre, o sea, sigue estando en los modelos de producción y en cómo se desarrollan esos modelos, si esos modelos se excluyen, se avasallan, si vulneran los derechos. Que me parece que ahí es donde también está el eje, por eso que cuando miramos el proceso de acaparamiento de tierra, tenemos que mirar todas las formas, no solo la propiedad privada, sino las distintas formas de tenencia, los distintos capitales, porque de última el modelo que desplaza y que avasalla sobre la soberanía de los territorios y la soberanía alimentaria es el que determina, más allá que sean recursos nacionales, capitales nacionales o extranjeros, sean fondos de inversiones o sean sociedades anónimas. Estoy de acuerdo con ese planteo que hizo Junior, clarito.
It comes from pension funds, real estate funds, it doesn't really matter. So I completely agree with
Gracias, Jacqueline. Hay otra pregunta que hace alguien desde Bélgica. Es tal vez una pregunta más general. No sé quién de los panelistas quisiera responderla. Es una pregunta que está en inglés. Voy a leerla en inglés. How can we best regulate land grabbing, put a limit on the property in terms of hectares, or install a limit or asset per hectare, or set a limit beyond which a public agricultural land regulatory body will have to give its authorization for the sale of the land? Can we do the same thing on the sale of company shares? Ok, repito la pregunta. How can we best regulate land grabbing, put a limit on the property in terms of hectare, or install a limit or asset per hectare, or set a limit beyond which a public agricultural land regulatory body will have to give its authorization for the sale of the land? Can we do the same thing on the sale of company shares?
Posso iniciar?
May I?
No Brasil, nós
Yo
já...
voy a decir algunas cosas. Ah, bien.
Não, bem, no Brasil temos vários debates sobre como fazer essa
In
regulação.
Brazil, we have a lot
E eu
of
penso,
debates
assim,
over
muitas
how
dessas
we can
propostas não
have this
avançaram.
regulation. And I
Eu
see
penso
that
que
a
as
lot of these
melhores,
proposals
elas
haven't really advanced.
partem
I
de uma
believe that
fusão
the
de
best
diversas
ones come
possibilidades.
from
Uma delas,
the
sem dúvida, é o limite do
gathering
tamanho
of
da
many different
propriedade que pode ser
possibilities. I
adquirida
believe that
por
we should
capital
set limits to the
estrangeiro, sem
size
dúvida alguma.
of
E os
properties
limites
that could be
brasileiros hoje me
acquired by
parecem razoáveis.
foreign
Estudos
companies.
comparativos entre os limites
Today, our
brasileiros e outros
limits
limites
are
mundiais mostram
calculated,
que há uma certa
and
sintonia.
I see
Mas
that
além do
these are in
limite,
line with
eu
other limits
acredito
that were
que
set by
uma
other
efetiva
countries. But
fiscalização
beyond
quanto
these
à
limits, I think
destinação
that we need
dessas
to have
terras.
effective regulation regarding the
Me parece
destination of
que
these
não é
lands. I
possível
think that it's
vedar a
not
aquisição de imóveis
possible
rurais
to
por
keep
estrangeiros em si,
rural
mas é
properties from
possível
being
vedar
acquired by
a
foreign
aquisição para determinadas
investors, but we
finalidades,
need
ou
to
pelo menos
somehow
condicionar
prevent
a
these
aquisição a determinadas
acquisitions
finalidades. E essas
so
finalidades não
that
podem
we do
comprometer
not
a
have certain
soberania, o interesse
purposes for
nacional,
these lands,
sobretudo
and
em
these
países
purposes could
como
not,
os nossos,
should not
que
at least
ainda
hinder
sofrem
the goals
do
of
mal
our
da
country,
fome, que
especially
essas
countries like
aquisições possam
ours,
comprometer
which
a nossa
suffer from
prioridade, que deve ser a
problems
número
such as
que é
hunger and
alimentar
other
o nosso
major
povo.
problems.
E
I
em
think the
relação
number
às
one
empresas
priority
de
should be
capital
to feed
aberto, como
our
controlar,
population.
se é possível
Regarding
limitar o controle
private
ou quem
equity
vai adquirir essas
companies, we
ações,
need to
talvez nós não
somehow
tenhamos condições
limit
de
shareholders, but
controlar
I
o
think
fluxo
that
desse
we will
capital,
be
dessas
able to
ações,
control the
mas nós
flow
podemos
of
sim vedar
this
que
capital and these
empresas ou
shares, but we can
determinadas organizações
definitely
financeiras
keep
possuem
some
esse modelo
companies
de
or
capital
some
aberto, de muita fluidez,
investment companies
adquiram
that have
imóveis.
this
Nós podemos,
model
por exemplo, e esse
from
já foi um debate no
acquiring real
Brasil,
estate. This is a
restringir
debate that
a
we have already
aquisição de
held in Brazil.
imóveis
We believe that we
rurais
can
a
restrict the
empresas de
acquisition of
capital
rural
fechado.
properties,
Nós
and
saibamos
we
quem
can
são os
keep
detentores dessas
companies
empresas, quem está por
from
trás desse
acquiring
capital.
these
E
rural
vedar, por exemplo,
properties
que
as long
empresas
as we
de
know
capital
who is
aberto,
behind these
que
companies.
operam em bolsas de
Sometimes
valores,
we
que elas
have
adquiram
other
imóveis rurais. Acho que
companies
mecanismos como esse,
that end up acquiring
não há uma
properties,
solução
and of
mágica,
course
mas mecanismos
they are not
como
in line
esses
with our
aprimorados
interests. I think that we need to
podem
have
ajudar ou
some
contribuir a pelo menos
mechanisms
termos
that
uma
can
regulação
help us
mínima
and
e
that can
sairmos do estágio
contribute
atual
to us
de absoluta
having at least
desregulação.
a minimum regulation that will help us leave our current status of no regulation at all.
Jacqueline, ¿querías añadir algo?
Está Philip. Y después yo.
Philip,
Capaz.
Okay,
¿Querés?
Philip.
you can go ahead.
Yeah, on the question of regulation, I mean, obviously
Philip?
that's a, yes, can you hear me? So on the question of regulation, obviously that's a complicated one. I mean, in the question, you put some elements in the question, and I think all of those are valid in a way. These are all tools, you know, you're kind of, yeah, you know, the limit, have land ceilings, so a maximum amount of land that can be owned. I think you could even, you know, there are even countries, including in Europe, where you have also specific regulations, or you have different regulations on whether it's a natural person or a legal personality. So this is a way also of excluding, you know, corporate actors. So I think there is not like that one measure that will solve our problems. And I also agree with the previous speaker who spoke about this. You know, there is also issues of taxation and a general question of public policies. So I guess there are, like you are putting forward in your question, some elements or building blocks of a regulation, but I think we have to look also at the broader picture, you know, as kind of that we are looking beyond just land laws. And I think the issue of having, you know, corporations as landowners, or even having financial actors as landowners, it creates those new challenges. There is currently, I mentioned in my presentation, I mentioned this case in Germany. And actually, there is a regional process now. The regional government is trying to revise its legislation so that these share deals. What happened is that that the new owner of those lands, it didn't buy the lands, but it bought the subsidiary companies of the landowner, and thus indirectly bought those lands. And this was the way of circumventing the law. So they are trying now. The lawmakers also trying to close those gaps. So I think there is not a simple answer to that, but I think in different parts of the world we are trying, and organizations are trying to get their heads around this. And I think these also exchanging on these things is really helpful. What I said earlier, I think it's really the issue also of not just looking into land. I think, as I said, we can probably also regulate land as much as we can, as long as we leave companies act in impunity, and completely having largely deregulated financial markets will probably not solve the issue. And as I said, I briefly mentioned in my presentation, I would really also look at the issue of all the environmental laws and everything that is coming up now with the carbon markets and all these offsetting schemes that are being integrated in the the real financial markets. So I think it's a challenge, and we really need to understand what is going on, and this is why this conversation today is really helpful. The final thing that I want to say, and just because I'm also a bit I spoke in my presentation about Europe, and just to say on the question of how to regulate it, I just want to mention also that in the European Union, or in Europe, the European Coordination of Via Campesina is also pushing for a EU directive on agricultural land, which also tries to put forward proposals on how to resolve those issues. And I think it's a really great collective work that is being done there from peasant organizations putting forward their own law proposals. And one of the things there is also one issue which is important for Europe, is also not only to look at the ownership of the land, but also of the use of the land. And I think this is also something that we've heard today a lot. So obviously the ownership is important, but also the use. And so one entry point could also be really to protect certain uses. And especially in Europe, there is a strong need also just to protect that lands, agricultural land, remain agricultural land, because we have so many projects also pushing for artificialization, so for infrastructure and roads and energy and whatever. I know this is not exclusive to Europe, but I just wanted to also mention there are people today participating who are much more involved into this, but I think it's important just to say that I think we are trying to work this out in many parts of the world, and it's good that we have these exchange spaces. Thank you very much.
Bueno, yo quería comentar que primero comparto lo que creo que las cosas que planteó.
First, I'd like to say that
¿no? En esto
I agree and share what Philip thinks, and I think we're going to be complementing each other. So in relation to regulation and access to land, in relation to foreign capital and these mechanisms of access to natural resources, land concentration, all of this is a part of our process. The regulation of financial systems, the financial mechanisms, the way in which capital can circulate, all of this has to do, all these issues are connected to each other. So how we can regulate and try to stop land grabbing of land and natural resources, all of this needs to be complementary and connected to each other, and connected to the protection of the territories of family agriculture, peasant agriculture, and indigenous and maroon communities. So these regulations need to be in our field of visions, because beyond the advance of land concentration that we go against, that we fight against, we also need to protect what is there already. So we need to combat all these initiatives of degradation. So we need to protect indigenous, peasant, and family agriculture territories. And this means that we need public policies that allow for the protection of territories in this logic of protecting cultures and communities' rights. And also the processes of food sovereignty and types of production, which are connected to the way these people relate, these different peoples relate to nature. And so we have a set of public policies which are connected to what Mara was mentioning. So a set of tools that allow for families and communities, peoples, and the peasant and family agriculture are able to maintain themselves, sustain themselves, and develop in their territories. So we need technical assistance, financing, investment. We need to think about different kinds of support for the development of agroecological models. So that's another side of this process of our struggles as well. If we don't protect the family agriculture and peasant agriculture territories, the process of land concentration will only expand. Capital has its own logic. Laws are not quick enough to follow the logic of capital. Governments have a lot to do with this as well. But the other side, it has to do with protecting territories of peasant and family agriculture and different public policies so that indigenous and peasant and family agriculture is able to maintain its territories. And that's what I'd like to say.
Olá, pessoal. Então,
hello, everyone. Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our event, of this important activity. I'd like to thank everyone who participated through social media, who were in the room with us. I'd like to thank our speakers who brought a lot of important information for our debate. And especially, I'd like to thank Mara, who is not with us anymore because Mara has sick children. Her children are sick, so she participated brilliantly, but she had to leave. And so I'd like to say generally that the debate will continue, and it will continue for a little more than 30 days because it's only in March the 7th that we will finish this debate. And from now to then, I think it's important for the speakers and all of us who participated here today are able to interact on our communication channels, which are made available by our organization, AGT. So I think it's important for us to continue because not all the questions were answered today because we have a limited amount of time. But we were able to see that we have problems, a lot of common problems in the group that presented today. So it's up to us to work with common actions, even if in each country or in each region, we need to act to fight against the expansion of foreign occupation of lands in our country. So I think this is very important for us to continue debating. We have to fight in defense of traditional communities, the variety of traditional communities in our lands. I was talking on WhatsApp with people from the state of Maranhão.
E que está participando aqui, está dizendo que
we're also saying that in Maranhão, traditional communities are in a similar state than to what Mara showed us. So I think we really need to throw a lot of pressure on actions in relation to defense of traditional communities for a variety of different reasons that I think we can talk about from now until the end of our debate. So I'd like to say that we are producing an important video. These are videos of accusations and of statements, testimonies of people who have been affected by foreign capital, and also testimony by people connected to social movements and lawyers which are connected to social movements, important law specialists, and we have Dr. Diogo from the Maranhão Association. We have Juna Fidelis, who is talking to us today. He also has important participation in this video we're making, and this video will be released in the next 10 to 15 days. So we'll make this available to AGTER to share with all of us. We are also producing a documentary, a larger documentary, which will have around 20 minutes. Will be around 20 minutes long, and will take a little while longer because of translation, but we'll be producing an overview of this larger documentary with around 4 to 5 minutes to make this available as quickly as possible to our group so that we are able to share this debate. Okay, so that's it from me. I don't know, Christian, I'd like to open the floor to you so that you can close the event.
Gracias, Alair, por estas palabras de cierre. Nos pasamos algunos minutos, ofrecemos disculpas a los traductores, súper importante el trabajo que hacen los traductores en simultáneo. Entonces, como decía Alair, los invitamos a todos a continuar participando. Esto, por supuesto, no acaba acá, este debate continúa. Los invitamos entonces a entrar a la página web del Foro de Luchas. Ahí van a encontrar el espacio para hacer sus preguntas, sus comentarios, y nosotros nos vamos a encargar de mantener el vínculo con los panelistas y en general de alimentar este debate. Entonces, muchas gracias a todos y damos por finalizada esta conferencia. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Nos estamos viendo.
Todos.